When you first start traveling through time, they run you through a list as long as your arm of things that you need to know. Most of it's technical and not important. I mean, some of the technical stuff's important, of course, like how to use the time machine and how to tell when and where you are with this fancy gadget. And yeah, it helps to know that you can't change the past, or what you plan to do is what you've already done, or however that actually works out, so you don't get stuck in some jail in World War II Berlin for trying to kill Hitler. That's not the interesting part, though. That comes later in the cautionary tales. Most of them deal with the whole unalterable past thing. Some of them are self-perpetuating paradoxes, like the guy who managed to become his entire family tree, and the rest is just plain common sense. There's the grammar thing. Temporal tenses tend to lose their meaning when what you're gonna do is what you've already done. You can technically finish things before you've even begun. But there are always things they don't warn you about. And I managed to find myself on the wrong side of one of them. A few years ago, I was doing a paper on post-medieval farming for the University of New Canton. Don't worry if you haven't heard of it. It probably hasn't been founded yet. I was in a small village outside of Barcelona, speaking with some of the locals when I first saw her. Standards of beauty have changed greatly over the years, but the instant I saw her, I knew there was something about her. As soon as I could politely excuse myself from my current conversation, I went over to introduce myself. Her name was Lucia, and in my eyes, she was the most beautiful woman to have ever walked the earth. Courtship etiquette has obviously changed significantly between 15th century Spain and the modern era, but eventually I managed to get her to trust me. Oh, it wasn't easy, not by a long shot, and I had to lay everything out there, as it were. I mean, I didn't tell her about my being a time traveler, not right away, not that she would have understood, but I had to tell her about who I was. The time machine helped with that, actually, because it's the fact where whenever you go, you kind of fit in. Anyways, I got her to trust me eventually, and then I took her forward. I got her permission first, of course. I'm not a kidnapper, but it took a lot of work to get that leap of faith from her. So I took her to my time period. At first, she didn't know what to make of it. So many speeding carriages with no horses in sight. Shiny black boxes that made music unlike anything she'd ever heard. More metal and glass than she'd ever seen. And I think that's what made her realize that what she was seeing wasn't a dream. The next words out of her mouth were, "Show me everything." Our next trip was somewhat more practical. Most time travelers make a stop in the transhuman era early in their career, because between the medical texts, like complete immunity and life extension and negligible senescence and all, the physical enhancements and the neural implants, all available for rock-bottom prices, you can just keep going backwards and forwards for as long as you want. After that, she was insatiable in her quest for knowledge. We traveled to ancient Athens to speak with Plato, then forward to debate post-humans. From natural philosophy to neural programming, we studied everything and saw science move from marketplaces to monasteries to matryoshka brains. We saw the library at Alexandria, the rallies at Nuremberg, and the unveiling of the Dyson sphere. We spent 30 years traveling everywhere and every when, and every now and then we would stop back in Barcelona and make sure that nobody was any the wiser. Eventually, Lucia decided that she wanted to stay at home for a while, and so we returned again to Barcelona. And Lucia and I said our goodbyes, and I promised to return, and that we would once again travel through time and space. 1 year, we agreed, and then we'd be off again, together. Knowledge changes people. After 3 years of adventure in times unknowable to her one-time fellows, Lucia was not the same person she was when she left. And even with an effective eternity of youth ahead of her, she chafed under the conditions she'd once known nothing but. I don't know exactly what happened, or how it happened, and I've always feared finding out. but Lucia must have said something about our travels. The Spanish Inquisition was not interested in witches, a sort of misconception that's been passed down through the ages. That's not to say the local authorities weren't concerned. When I returned after the year we'd agreed upon, I learned that my beloved Lucia had been burned as a witch 3 months prior. I'm not proud of what I did next. I broke into her house. Fortunately, the villagers hadn't gone inside. Superstitious fear will do that to you. Once I was in, I knew why Lucia had wanted to remain at home. I took 2 things from that house, a carbonic gold pendant and our infant son. I wasn't thinking clearly at all at the time. And once I finally took the time to think about it, I knew that I was not going to be able to raise a child. And I didn't know anyone who could. Fortunately, I had some contacts in fellow time travelers, and one of them put me in contact with a couple in the early 20th century who were having trouble conceiving a child. I made arrangements for a decent education for the time, and left him in their care, along with a pendant with an iris on the front. Even after everything that she saw, Lucia always believed that the iris had some sort of secretive reincarnation. No matter what happened, she always told me, no matter what plague or blight would befall her gardens, every year the iris patch would grow back, just as healthy as ever. I learned where they buried her. Every year, on the day I was meant to return, to take her back to the great expanse of time, I go there, and I put a single iris on the site. Now, I'm sorry, but you'll have to excuse me. I have an appointment to keep.
That told him that Jim was round somewhere. And he closed his Bible gently in the middle of the psalm and started thinking mentally where that smell was coming from. His eyes scanned every pew, and then he did declare, he says, I announced this meeting through until you kick in with my share. Oh, forever, and if you want more preaching, save a little dram for me. Glory, hallelujah, why drinking gin ain't against my teaching. Treat me with equality. From this here smell is very plain to see that somebody here's been holding out on me. Oh, forever, and if you want more preaching, save a little dram for me. Now, when they passed the bone dry law, I was the very first to say that it never would stay.